artist who painted the John Mellencamp mural downtown. She's from Indianapolis. She's been creating outdoor and indoor murals, portraits, and canvas art for 30 years. She has her master's degree from IU Bloomington. Her artwork was featured in the Oscar-nominated movie Loving Vincent. Loving Vincent from 2016. Yeah, so really cool to have you here, Pam, and thank you. I'm going to share with you some what I'm calling mural stats, just some interesting things about the mural. John with the guitar is 35 feet tall, right? Yep, and the guitar, Pam estimated about 22 feet. So that kind of tells you a little bit how high she had to get up to paint that. And how tall is FFA, John? You know?
Oh, I forgot. I think he is about the height of the, I forgot to look at that. I think it's about the height of the guitar, so probably around,
Yeah,
so probably around 20, 22 feet.
22 feet, okay. And Pam painted it over the course of 6 weeks and only had a few days off in between. The mural took about 40 gallons of paint between the background and the mural itself, right?
40 or plus.
Okay, cool.
I use really expensive paint for the art part.
Yeah, sure. I can only imagine. So we're going to dive right into some questions here. This section is going to cover kind of before the painting. Let's just first start off with how you got into painting murals, and what are some of them you've completed, and I guess how many have you done?
Well, I've done, I haven't counted, I've done over 50 murals, but how I got started was there was a lady in Richmond, Indiana. Well, actually, she was living in California, but she was an heir to the Jeanette Records, which is the jazz heritage in Richmond, Indiana. And she was trying to get them to pay attention, the city to pay attention to the heritage, because they have a very unique heritage. That was the only place in the United States that jazz was being recorded. And because of there was only 2 places in the country that you could record music at that time. One was Chicago, the other one was Jeanette Records Studios in Richmond. And because of racial tensions, they did not want the black people to record there in Chicago. And they thought that jazz was just a fad music. And so the Jeanette Records said, come down here, we'll record you. So Louis Armstrong, Little Hardin Armstrong, Jelly Roll Morton, Vic Spiderbeck. There are so many, all of the jazz greats around that time when it was coming out, that they recorded there, and that was the first sounds recorded of jazz. And so that's a very important history, and she was trying to get the town to pay attention to the importance of their heritage. And she said that they would put an article in the newspaper and people would forget about it after about a week, and she thought she needed to do something to get them in front of their faces all the time. And she was from Southern California. Los Angeles has over 3,000 murals, and she understood the importance, the significance of what public art does. So she looked around Richmond and wanted to find out if there was an artist that could paint 15-foot tall figures. Are her favorite band. And so she contacted the college that I was attending a college at the time there. And so the art professor referred me because I did portraiture very well. And so she contacted me, and so after the first one, I painted another one for her, and then another, and then it started snowballing. People started saying how the public art was, one, beautifying their city, but also educating people, and it brought in people from out of town. And so other people started wanting murals, and so it just started snowballing from there.
How and when were you commissioned to paint the Mellencamp mural? Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh gosh, that would be a better question for Larry McDonald. Well, I don't know how many years ago it was that I'd seen Jana Plump, and we don't remember where it was, maybe Indianapolis, but we happened to just start talking when we were in the same location, and I found out she was from Seymour. I said, oh, Seymour, I would love to paint a mural of John Mellencamp there. And so I gave her my business card, and then, it was, forgotten about. And then, so probably 3 years before it was actually painted, I was contacted, and Jana had kept the business card, happened to keep the business card, and it was still my same phone number and email, thankfully. And so I got into the loop about 3 years ago, but it's got more of a history, and I'll let Larry talk more about that.
Okay. I guess my next question's a little bit silly, because I was going to ask you if you'd ever heard of Seymour before John Mellencamp, but obviously since you brought that up to Jana,
oh yeah,
you've heard of Seymour.
I researched who I could paint, and
Okay.
John Mellencamp was one of the first ones, and I always knew that because I grew up listening to, as a young adult, I listened to his music, so it was very nostalgic for me, and it just made sense.
Right. And we were talking a little bit before. Now is kind of your time. You can't paint murals now because of the weather. Now is kind of your marketing time, so that's kind of what you were doing, was making a list of people you could paint.
Right. Yeah. Like right now, I'm designing for the murals that I will be painting. Right now is only make money like half of the year when I'm actually painting. When I'm designing and when I'm applying for other projects and that kind of thing during the cold weather, that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing right now. So sometimes when I'm lucky, I'll get an indoor project, but it's mostly at the outdoor.
Okay. What did you do during your first trip here before painting the mural, or as you were going to start, if you remember?
Well, I came down and met a couple of times with this Larry and Jana and the mayor.
Okay.
And so I just drove around to see what the town was like. And so, that's what I did when I first got here. I wanted to see where the grocery store was, because I stayed in the Airbnb that Sean Busby has above
Greenman's Furniture.
Greenman's, right.
Yeah. And by the way, thank you, Sean, for providing the sound today. Forgot to mention that earlier. And what did the preparation for the wall actually, how did you prepare the wall? What's that look like?
Yeah, that's another question for Larry, because there were some areas that needed to be patched and repaired. Some of the windows needed to be filled in, and so he kind of directed that. But so yeah, because some walls I can just walk up to it and just start painting. Other walls it takes, if it's a raw wall, it needs a primer, concrete primer sealer beforehand. But if it's a wall, the bricks needs to be repaired, some tuck pointing is involved. And so on this one, it was like the whole shebang. It was already painted, but it needed to be pressure washed, it needed to be repaired and that kind of thing, because they wanted the wall to last because the mural will last, if you have a good solid wall, the mural will last much longer.
Sure. Now we're going to kind of talk about what you were doing during the paintings. That's what these questions will be about. Walk me through, what was your daily routine as you painted the mural, as you got going?
Well, I have to make sure that sometimes I've got, several cans of paint around me, different colors. I've got my water bucket, and then, I've got my platform is full, and I have to stand only in one spot and move this way, or I have to lift up a bucket so I can step over. So there's usually, if I have a lift, I can keep my paints in the lift and I don't have to move it. If it's down lower and I have to keep the paints in the car, that means I have to get the paints out every time, and and I have to put them back in and that kind of thing. And then my car, my little red car, I call it my paint wagon because it's got paint spilled everywhere. But yeah, and then some days that I may have to do some drawing, and some days I may just be doing the paintings.
Okay. Okay. Kind of on the wall, where did you start and why? And what part of the painting was that?
I started with the tall figure, John's face, because that's the most important and it's the highest. I want to get the height over with, but also I usually, if I have a mural that has a face in it and there's other things, I usually try to start with the face first, just so people can zero in on that, and then I can, paint around it. But typically, I start at the top and then come down, because if I paint down low and then I move at the top and I have some spills, like I had a spill, then I would have to paint it all again. So usually I have to start at the top and come down.
Tell me about this spill. I didn't know about the spill.
I never spill paint. I always take that back. My very first mural, I had to use scaffolding, and I had to build the scaffolding myself. I was 30 years younger at that time, so I could do that. And the scaffolding was like 30 feet high, so I had to build my own scaffolding, so that was and so I had to move the paint buckets, and I finally got done with my very first mural. It took me 4 months because I didn't know what I was doing. I had to teach myself how to paint, because it's a totally different way of painting. But so they wanted local TV to come and record the unveiling or cut the ribbon. And so it was the night before, it was all done, we were bringing it down, and a can of paint spills all down that was my very first mural. So I had to get 5-gallon buckets of water from the hotel across the street and start throwing it on the wall, and then on their new pavement. So I learned, quickly on that. So usually I had plastic down for this, but I hadn't spilled a gallon of paint since then, except for this one, and it was right where I didn't have the plastic. And it just splattered all down. It was black, and it just splattered all down. $125 gallon paint, yeah.
Wow. Oh man, that's not good. What did you use to scale the painting? Because oftentimes I think about, I couldn't paint something on a postcard, but painting something that large, how are you able to?
Yeah, I do a lot of measuring. If it's within my range of vision, I can go ahead and sketch it. It's quicker to just go ahead and sketch it, draw it. If it's something that, like right here, if the nose is this big, when I'm looking at it over here, I can't see it over here, so I don't have that range of vision. And also I can't step back because I'm up in a boom lift. So I have to do measuring, and so what I do is I'll put a grid on the drawing, and then I will sketch it. Sometimes I don't even have to do the grid. I just put measure points and just put it.
Kind of like a marker kind of thing, right?
Right.
Okay. And how are you able to paint the details on bricks? Because, like I said, I couldn't paint anything, but that's really one of the most incredible things I've ever seen.
Well, I like painting details on brick now, better than on canvas, because I can do it a lot looser. When I'm painting on canvas, it's, people are looking at it, and so they can see the detail right here. So I have to spend hours just on the details to get that detail. But when you're up far away, you have to paint more impressionistic, because if you paint tight, it will look like he's got eyeliner on, or it just won't look right. You have to paint it a lot looser, which is a lot freer painting, and it's actually more relaxing for me to not have to paint. But and another thing I had to learn was, and I think that kind of depends on the wall, though. It kind of adds to my style. I have to also push into the brick sometimes to get the paint in the hole, in the hole, because, you know, sometimes the bricks have holes. I have to make sure that the paint goes in there too, so, you know, there's less peeling.
And we were talking before, you kind of have a slight fear of heights, right?
I do.
So how does that play in?
Well, the first few times I went up in a bucket, I mean, I was just, and I still, when I first go up in a bucket, I have to, or a boom lift, I have to get my bearings, and I have to be comfortable with it. And then once I start painting, I just zone out, and so I'm not thinking about dying. But I was telling him earlier that I do have fear of heights, and if I walk up to like a balcony or something that has a drop off, if I walk up on it unexpectedly, and I'll get a panic attack. I'll have a panic attack.
Yeah. So you spent how much time up in a lift there?
Right,
yeah. And there had to be a lot of people stop you during the process and kind of talk to you. I know I was one of them. Several days I went over and said hello. And what were some of the memorable conversations that you had with people as you were painting the mural?
Oh, definitely the family. They came up, which I thought was really cool. And you know, people usually welcome me into it when I'm painting a mural, because, you know, it's, you know, they want to watch the process. But I've never really been so welcomed by a community and, you know, the family. I mean, because I get to know the family, like the Kurt Vonnegut, I got to know his daughter, and which was cool. But she lived in Massachusetts. She lived in another state. But this town, they welcomed me much more welcoming than, you know, the family, and you know, it was a really cool experience.
That's good to hear. You shoot hoops with Reggie Miller. She also painted the Reggie Miller mural in Indianapolis. Did you meet Reggie?
Yeah, I got to meet Reggie.
Yeah. Was there a time where you were kind of thinking, man, I don't know how this is going to turn out on the mural, or
his face? It really irritated me for the first few days. But that's what it usually does, and I have to figure out why it doesn't look like him. So I have to keep getting down, and I step back and I look a lot, and I get frustrated, and I have to quit for a minute because I get really annoyed because it's not doing what I want it to do. And so his face was, and I don't know if it was the angle of it, or if there wasn't, because a lot of times I'll have a lot of contrast. The more contrast there is in a face, the easier it is, because you can, you know, you have to look at the spaces and how the juxtaposition of those, and, you know, how they relate to each other. And if there's not a lot of contrast, then it's harder to do that. And I think maybe that's why his face was a little bit more difficult for me, but I finally got it. I finally worked it and worked it. I finally got it.
I think everybody here agrees that it worked out. Right. And what was it like having John's sister Janet come the day with her students and have them paint? That must have been fun.
That was awesome. That was really fun to see those little kids. And then you know, I went to her classroom afterwards, after I got the mural, and I was able to work with her kids, you know, one-on-one with them. So I got to know the kids personally, and so that was a very, very great experience for me.
Let's talk about when John actually came to visit, because that was probably a big highlight, wouldn't you say?
Oh my God, I didn't know what to, I couldn't say anything. I didn't know what to, all I could say was, it's nice to meet you. That's the only thing I really said to him. And, except for I did ask him if he would put the initials on the guitar, because there was initials in the picture, there's initials on his guitar, and I was just getting ready to paint those initials when he came, and so I'm like, this is perfect. And I didn't know if he would or not, because I didn't know if he liked the mural, because, you know, it's difficult. I think some people they don't like to see their own, I don't like my own image, I hate seeing myself in pictures. I hope I never get a mural painted of myself. So, you know, and there's always that pressure, and so when he said yes, you know, that was a relief, when he said yes, that he would sign that. But
did you know he was coming before he came, or did you have an idea or anything? It was a complete surprise?
Yeah. So his dad had called and said that someone was coming, but I thought it was like his uncle or nephew or.
It would be him himself, right?
Yeah.
That's great. What was it like then? That had to be a surprise when you saw him. I mean, did it immediately register, or and what you think of that?
Yeah, as well, my sister was there. My twin sister, she happened to be in Indiana visiting family, so she was getting ready to leave to go back, and so she came down here to have lunch with me, and then she was helping me paint a little bit, and actually Mayor Luderman was standing there, and he said, "Someone's here to see you," and you know, I turned around and I looked, and then I saw. I think I saw Janet and Richard at first, Laura and Richard at first. Of course, you know, I was used to seeing them.
Yeah.
And then there was John, and I'm like, Terry, look.
And then I'm sure he was confused which one's painting the mural, right? Twin sister. And what did it mean to you to have him come here and actually sign his initials? That just had to be pretty special.
Yeah, for him to give his approval, I mean, that was such a relief, because not only, you know, it's his likeness, but he's also a painter himself, and not just a painter, he's also a portrait painter. So there's that extra added pressure there, and so it was just a sigh of relief when he agreed to do that.
And what does that add to the mural, in your opinion, actually having him sign his initials?
Yeah, that's the first time. That's the first time that adds a lot of provenance to the mural that I don't have on the other murals. I mean that's something unique. That's his stamp of approval on there, and so that wall is probably worth a lot more money now just because it's
Good to know. Now we're going to kind of talk about finishing the mural. What were your final touches? Because I know that there was a time I came over and said, well, it looked pretty much done to me. And you're like, no, I got about a week left. So what were the final touches on it?
Oh, I think I had to put detail on the jeans, and then finish the shoes, details on the shoes. I also had to put a sealer on it too, to kind of protect the colors, make them last longer.
And how long will the mural actually last? You know,
As long as the wall will last.
As long as the wall.
Yeah. It's good that it's an eastern exposure. Southern exposure is the worst because it's full sun. Northern exposure is the best because there's no sun, so it won't fade as quickly. Western, you get, I think Eastern and Western, they're kind of equal. Over time, the colors may fade a little bit, but if the wall is good wall, then the painting will last for 40 years.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Good to know. And then recently, the news this week was that John and the family committed $50,000 to kind of create a plaza there. Just kind of want to know what you think of that, because that's really exciting. And just your thoughts.
Yeah, and that's just an added approval of the painting, which makes me feel good. The family is the one that wanted to make the area look a little bit cleaner, because it can get real dirty there below the mural, and it will help the mural last longer. The dirt coming up from it, and then also I know at the festival that you have in October, usually there's some trucks and stuff sitting there, and that brings in a lot extra dirt and stuff. Right. So this will create a little bit of a barrier to help protect that. Okay. But I was We have kids in the audience. Yeah. There was a couple naysayers on Facebook, and I just
I can't
told
imagine
them what I
that.
thought.
You couldn't imagine somebody being a naysayer on Facebook. It's hard to believe.
Right. Well, and I told them exactly how I felt, so I
Good
had
for you.
some language that I can't say here since it's kids.
Oh man. So how did this one actually compare to the other ones that you have done? You know, obviously the Reggie Miller and all those. How did this one compare, I guess, in terms of how challenging it was or any other comparisons?
His face was a little bit more challenging than usual, but the rest of it was about the same. But anytime you start going a little bit bigger, it seemed to take, and I think it's because it seemed to take a little bit longer, the paint absorbing, because it's like, that's all I got done today, you know? But the paint, because I had to put on a couple of coats in each area, 2 or 3, 4 sometimes, depends on what it was. But if you have a newer wall, it takes a lot more paint because it, you know, absorbs and it keeps absorbing. If there was several coats of paint that was already on there, I wouldn't have had to put so much paint on it to finish the areas.
Now I guess we'll turn it over. If anybody has any questions, she can take a few questions before we move on. Anybody have any?
I just wanted to know what are the contents of the paint that you use on the figure and on the face that make it, you know, it's obviously very expensive and it's made to last a long time. Is it an acrylic? Is it oil?
It's acrylic, yeah. It's called Nova Color. It's out of paint out of California. And the reason why it's more expensive is because it has more pigment in it. And when you have more pigment, then the colors will last longer. I have been using Sherwin-Williams, and we use that as the base, which is a good paint, but I noticed that lately they've done something with the reds, and the reds have been fading a lot quicker. And so I wanted this is the first time I've used these paint. Well, I take that back. I did a V mural right before this one. But this is the first time I painted a face, you know, like this. And so it was, I had to, it reacts a little bit differently. So I think that's another reason why it took me a little bit of time too. But it's because there's more pigment in it.
And how long did you have to wait for it to dry before, like you say, you have 3 and 4 coats in one place maybe? So did you have to let this dry and wait and come back tomorrow? And
Sometimes. It dries pretty quick, but it just depends on what I needed it to do. If I needed to blend, I needed to go ahead and do it right away. If I needed it to be more solid in that color, then I would have to wait until, well, just a few hours. I mean, I really don't need to wait the next day. It just depends on, you know, where I am at in the process.
In your preliminary sketch, your preliminary drawing, about what size do you do your preliminaries? And I presume you do it in a proportion to the wall that you're going to be painting on?
Yeah, I like to do it in Photoshop. Since I paint realism, then I'm fortunate that I can take imagery, photographs and stuff, and then cut them out, put them on Photoshop, and arrange and make a design on Photoshop. So I had took a picture of the wall and put the design right on the wall so they could see what it would look like.
So you don't do a miniature painting then in maquette
No.
On canvas or anything
No.
small size?
No.
It's just
I only had to do that one other time because I had to change it was a black and white picture and they wanted it in color, and so that's when I had to do that. Sometimes I don't have to do that. When I did the Kurt Vonnegut, I had to translate it. Normally I'm done painting with murals in end of October. They didn't ask me to start painting the Kurt Vonnegut until it was beginning of October, middle of October. I started very late, And so it's like I had no time to prepare, because they wanted, the picture that I was going by, they wanted him to look like he was in his 50s. The picture I took, he was in his 80s. So I had to take like 3 or 4 different portraits of him at that age, but I also had to use different ones because I had to get the angle just right and the lighting and all that. So I had these 4 pictures, and I painted a 6-foot tall head. That's the first time I had ever done that. And so that was probably the most challenging one there. But
Do you make all your choices as far as what images you use? I presume you have a lot to choose from with John.
yeah, on this one, because when you're working with well-known people, there's copyright issues, and I knew that right in the beginning, so I asked the office to send pictures that we had already had permission to use. So that was very limiting, but you know, they just happened to be some nice pictures that, and it, you know, I had a couple different designs. One had the city behind it, the town behind it, and it was really busy. So, but they went for more clean, you know, without the city behind it.
There's thousands of pictures of John or images of him, and the 2 you've chosen are outstanding. How did you come about choosing those 2 images?
Well, they were, let's see, well, between me and the office, we actually, how did we, Janet asked me.
Actually, we took the larger image and I cut it out and put it on a blank picture of Larry's building. And I think I sent that to you because the one you had before, we both said, it's not what it, and then when I sent that to you, you said, that's it.
Yeah.
So it was like on a Friday night, we were cutting and pasting and sending back and forth.
That was out of a magazine, if I recall, too.
Yeah.
We had to get his permission
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, I had to get the photographer.
Yeah, the photographer took the picture with John for that magazine, gave us authorization to use it. Yeah.
Yeah, because you run into copyright issues. Anytime you copy another artist, whether it's a photographer or another painter or whatever, then you run into derivative work, and you run into copyright, so you have to get permission.
It's funny how you said you didn't like the face at first, because I remember seeing the pictures right from the very beginning, and everybody commenting, that doesn't look like John, that doesn't look like John. I mean, it really did not look like John when you first started with it. It's
Right.
amazing how it went from not looking like him at all to just, you know, a likeness, you know.
Right, and just the little movement of something, like the tilt of an eye, or bringing the eye in just a little bit, or making the nose bigger or just slightly smaller, just very subtle. Those are the things that will make it look like someone or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to focus mostly on the face because I want the subject to, I want to capture the personality, not just that it looks like him, but also the personality of it. So I have to study for a long time.
You got it well.
More detail in a picture that I can have, the more detail, clearer it is, the better.
Mm-hmm.
I can paint. I'm only as good as my resource.
I was impressed with the touch of the sign that kind of looked like a license plate that said I was born in a small town. How did you come up with that idea?
You're talking about the Rock and Roll
Mm-hmm.
Hall of Fame. Yeah. They wanted that on there, and I had I was born in a small town on there, and they also wanted to add that Rock and Roll Hall of Fame 2008 inductee. But to me, it was just too much work because you had Mellencamp, the words Mellencamp, then the song title, and then so it just needed to be separate. So I decided to make it look like it was a plaque, like he had won the plaque.
Any other questions?
Was there any thought to also add these in Songwriters Hall of Fame?
Songwriters Hall of Fame. No, we didn't. No one
Oops.
suggested that. We can have.
That's another kind of big deal.
It's good to
Yeah,
paint.
actually.
I know I come by a couple times to talk to you, but you talk about the weather. You know, what, I guess my question is like, what's like the perfect days to paint, or when you get up, you know, if there rain's on the way or anything, how does that affect you?
An overcast day, about 65 or 70 degrees is perfect for me. Anything else is just, I'm miserable the entire time. Because I've got low vitamin D, and I just found out that I have a gene that doesn't process vitamin D right. So even though I'm out in the sun and I am brown by the end of the summer, I still have low vitamin D. The sun affects me badly, and so I have to get out of the sun. I have to take a lot of breaks because it wears me out.
I guess what I was kind of wondering was,
Oh.
I thought it might like affect the paint or anything.
Oh, that's about the paint.
Like really-
Yeah, actually, if it's gonna be humid and it's gonna rain right before and after, it's not good to paint because the paint doesn't cure properly, and if it doesn't cure properly, it'll stay soft, and then if it rains again, it'll just wash it off, even though it might be kind of dry. So the weather does affect it.
So how long did it take you from start to finish?
I think it was, what, 6 weeks?
6 weeks.
That's it?
Yeah.
Wow. That's quick.
You touched on this a little bit, talking about the people that thought their work needed to be added to the wall, the kids that you had to speak harshly with. Are there, without giving away, things that would affect security, are there really good security things in place to protect the mural?
There will be.
Yeah, that's a question for Larry.
Any other questions?
I might mention too that she went to a lot of extreme folks, even to the point, if you ever drove by the store and saw me and my son stand out in front of it rotating, she had my son and I, we had 2 different colored jeans on, and she wanted to get the perfect shade of how it would hit that mural. So we stood out while she goes, okay, right there, you're right there. And we didn't have an FFA code, so we called over at John's studio, and they said, yeah, we can get one, and then I found out Laura had one. So I got one from John's sister, and obviously it wouldn't fit us. So I got the granddaughter to stand in front of the mural while she had her rotate, that FFA
To
code.
get
I
the
mean,
right shit, the right
it's incredible the amount of
sunlight.
work and shading and all the stuff that she did behind the scenes.
Well, there's a FFA jacket back
That's
there.
my, you should call me, Larry, my FFA jacket back there. I think so, I saw someone else have their hand up, yeah.
Is there another famous celebrity you'd like to do, or do you have any offers?
There's been talk about Peyton Manning. I don't know if that'll happen or not. But I don't know, I would like to paint a lot. But John was really one of my number ones just because he was Indiana, and it was nostalgic for me. And, it's part of my young adult life.
Where are you from?
Over like eastern part of the state, over in Wayne County, like Cambridge City, Richmond area. I was born in Newcastle, but I went to school in Cambridge.
All right, well, we're gonna let you kind of get set up here on your, she's gonna share some images with us. While she's setting that up, we're gonna have Larry McDonald.
Where's the